Welcome, everyone. I'm Katie Chancellor from Learning Through Literature, and today I am speaking with Amber O'Neill Johnston from heritagemom.com, where she writes and speaks about homeschooling and offers Black history lesson guides called Heritage Packs. Now, Amber is known for saying that in her home, Charlotte Mason wears an afro, and she is passionate about helping families add multicultural mirrors and windows to family bookshelves. So welcome, Amber.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I'm so glad you're here talking with me today. Now, first, we're going to talk today about classic books, but do you want to first talk a little bit about the idea of adding mirrors and windows to your bookshelves, since that is going to be relevant to what we talk about today?
Yes, definitely. Just a quick overview. But when I first started homeschooling, I was following different curriculum plans, like word for word, book by book, doing it perfectly the way my personality likes to do things. And my daughter brought to my attention, in a very emotionally wrenching way, heart-wrenching way, that she was not seeing anyone like her in our books, in our school books, maybe sometimes in our picture books at bedtime and things, but during our school day. And that was really convicting for me. And I took some time to really explore, kind of what I was doing and why and what path we were on. I had to do a lot of soul searching back to my own education and my feelings about all of this. And at the end, it kind of shook out that I was like, I needed to prioritize her seeing herself in her school books, and it's more important than I ever imagined it was. And oh, by the way, in the process of that research and thought and reading, I found that I also needed to provide her opportunities to see other people, other cultures too, because a lot of times the story can get stuck with black and white, here in America, but that there were so many other windows that she needed to be able to look through in order to get to know others and their experiences as well. And that's kind of where I landed.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone is wanting to hear more about particularly what you say about that, they can find that on your website, right? You have a lot of information
Yeah,
there about that.
yeah, they can just search mirrors or mirrors and windows on the website, and things will come up, including a talk I gave earlier this summer, and it's on there for free.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I could probably put a link here too for that.
Mhm.
Now we're going to talk about classics specifically today, some of the good things, the not so good things, and just how we handle that in our home with our kids particularly. So we should probably start by just defining what we mean when we're talking about a classic book. So when I talk about a classic book, I'm talking about something that, I guess the short answer would just be something that has stood the test of time, for being noteworthy, maybe for its literary quality or its impact on culture, just something that stayed in print and people have continued to read through a long period of time. Is that what you would say?
I mean, generally, I'm along the same lines. It's usually just, I think that being an older book isn't the definition, but it is the result, because again, that thought that it's classic, we're considering it to be so because it hasn't gone out of style, or, as you mentioned, out of print, but people are still reading it enthusiastically. The message is one that resonates. And for me, also a book where the title is well known among our society.
Yeah. There's a Mark Twain quote that makes me laugh about classic books. It's something along the lines of, a classic is a book that people want to have read, but not like people don't want to read, which is not how I define a classic, but I just think that one's really funny.
That is funny. I mean, yeah, I think it's, for a lot of us, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think of, my book list from my English teacher in
Yeah.
high school, AP English, what were you reading in lit, or what books that I read that my mom also read, things like that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too that it's not a term like, it's a book being a classic can be kind of a fluid thing that, books can go in and out of fashion, or maybe they, weren't popular when they were first published. And then they, maybe speak to a culture at a certain time. And then it comes in, as a classic later on. I just think it's interesting to watch that happen over time too. And then we have modern classics that aren't
Exactly.
really yet classics, but maybe there's something about them that we know, oh, that one's going to stand the test of time, or that one's going to make an impact for a long time.
Absolutely. I think about that all the time. Like I'll read a book now and I'm like, ooh, this one's gonna be here for a while.
Yeah.
I'm reading tomorrow's classic today.
Yes, that's always exciting to me too. Um, so when we're talking about classics and the value of them, I mean, you and I have talked about how there is a value to reading those, and so we do read them with our kids. Maybe not every single one of them, but what, like, can you talk to some of the value that you find in your home reading those to your kids?
Yeah, definitely. So I think because of my focus on the mirrors and windows and the need for culture and heritage being reflected in our school books, I think a lot of times people are surprised to hear me say that our shelves are lined with classics that we read, and how much my family has enjoyed those read alouds and those times together reading the classic books. And so people are asking me what is going on here because the classics are often known as lacking diversity,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes even having derogatory comments or information about Black people and other cultures as well. But for the most part, they're just completely missing. And I acknowledge that and recognize that. And for me, I say that's why my message is that the classics are not enough. But
Mm-hmm.
my message has never been to eliminate the classics altogether. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that they play a very important role. For me personally, there's the Amber's heart and that reason for wanting to share those books with my kids. And then there's Amber's academic sense, intellect, why I want to share those with my kids. So from my heart, it's because quite frankly, I loved the books growing up. And there's something about a mother who wants to share a loved thing with her children. I mean, I remember at recess pretending to be Anne and Diana with my best friend on the
Mm-hmm.
elementary school, and we reconnected years later on Facebook. And the first thing we said to each other, "Do you remember when we were Anne and Diana on the playground?" And she's like, "I totally remember that." So, I mean, I can't help but smile when I think about that, and the thought that I would be raising kids and not share that with them is kind of, I don't know. I want them to love some of the things that I loved, and so that's kind of my heart reason. To
Right.
snuggle up on the couch and be like, "Look, this book was so good." And then my kind of intellectual reason, academic reason, I feel like so many conversations that I've had in my adult life have made references to this book, or that book, and to little small aspects or a little saying or a certain character. And I just enjoy those. I know this tickles me, and I like to be able to participate. I like to get the joke. I
Mm-hmm.
like to be able to know what someone says when they're like, "Oh, he's such a Mr. Darcy," and I'm like, true, but I would hate to miss out on that. Is it important? Is it important for our careers? Is it important for our lives? I mean, no, but I enjoy that feeling of being on the inside. And I think that these books go across, and infused into the lexicon of you know, our American society. And I just don't want my kids to miss out on those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of those for me too. Yeah, there's, the nostalgia of the books that I loved as a kid, I want to share with my kids. And that doesn't mean that we don't explore other ones that I didn't read or maybe, didn't grow up loving. We'll still explore those sometimes just for the literary quality of them, the writing that often tends to be richer or more challenging. And I want them to experience that. And I want them to kind of chew on a quality of writing or a different type of writing that they're not used to, because I think that's can stretch you. But then also just I'm excited for them to like some of these books, and I try not to take it personally when they don't like the ones that I loved growing up. But there's still a quality. I mean, there's still a value to them hearing that quality of writing, or like you said, experiencing something that is different from what they've experienced, a different window, if you into another time period, particularly when it was written, when it was happening. Like if the story takes place when that person was writing, when they lived, I find that even more fascinating. Although I can sometimes not have that understanding built in. Like if someone writes a story that even ones that we call classic today that maybe were written at a time period later on when they wrote it about previous times, that can be, they can build in a little bit more of trying to put you in that time period. But when you just get dropped into something that is, it's like it's a preserved time period of the person writing and the time they're talking about, and it's fascinating, but it can be challenging.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're just looking through the window going, I don't understand what I'm seeing here, or it can feel uncomfortable sometimes. But I think that's good for my kids to wrestle with that. So I like that as well. And the cultural literacy you were talking about, it can't be the reason, like the main reason,
Yeah.
but I find that important too, because I want them to get the jokes of,
it's a little cherry on top. Why not? But to your point about the literary quality, I think that's like an overarching, reason for pursuing that literature. I also think that it helps with children who can read at a higher level but have the maturity level of their age. A lot of the classics allow the children to read to their reading level while keeping the material at the appropriate kid level. And that's been more challenging for me with the more contemporary books. So the books that are at the reading level that I want for my children or that they need, sometimes the topics I'm like, woo, we're not there yet. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's another thing. It was really high. A lot of the classics were high level literature written at a high quality, but the topics were still little girl and little boy topics. And I think that's another draw.
And sometimes they do, maybe modern books might not discuss some other hard things as often, something like death, or it might handle it in a different way. So that it's not that those aren't ever in classics, but you can definitely find those classic books. In fact, that's a question that we've gotten recently from readers saying, I have a sensitive child, but a higher reading level, and it's hard to find a book that can challenge them. But there are, there's, like, I think of The Wind in the Willows, where it's just a sweet story. It's just fun, but it is a challenging book. The language is a very elevated language. So you can definitely find more of those options in classics.
So it's funny you mentioned that. I remember reading that book aloud to my kids, and I was like, I don't know, I'm tired. I'm just going to grab something possibly. This is a book about animals. And I sat down on the couch, and I was like kind of relaxed back reading. And I was like, oh, let me sit up for my read aloud of this. I was like, I got to pay attention. These are some long sentences and some big words. And I was like, okay, but it was wonderful. But I just think that's funny because I thought I was grabbing a little book about animals and it was going to be an easy read for me. But I ended up having to put my spectacles on, So
that is some high quality language in that one, for sure. In fact, it might even be hard for, just handing it to a kid unless they're pretty high.
I definitely had to read that one aloud. I mean, my kids loved it, but at the time we were reading it, there was no way they could have read it.
That one's really good. Read aloud or on audio.
Yeah.
I like that one on audio. So you touched on some of the negatives that we can run into, because those definitely, maybe great quality, but maybe other windows that can be uncomfortable sometimes to peek into. And so maybe let's talk about some of those negatives and the drawbacks specifically of what we can bump into when we're reading.
Well, I think the most obvious one for my family and the things that I first started seeing were, they're both negative comments about people of other cultures. So I've seen it the most with Black people and with Indigenous people in the books that we were reading. But I mean, I've also some about Asian people as well. Yeah, all the people. I mean, I see these little comments, zingers here and there. And sometimes it's been difficult because if we're coming upon a string of them, maybe across multiple school books, I start to feel like enough is enough. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the book itself, I feel it has too much. It's now the cons have outweighed the pros. Mm-hmm. But admittedly, sometimes the book might only have a little bit of that, but I'm through with it because that was our 5th book in a row that had something, or this school year. And so it's a compound effect. Mm-hmm. Where we're just getting a steady stream of these negative comments, sometimes overt, sometimes subtle. but I have to be very careful that my children aren't constantly reading things about how they are less than, or even how people thought that they were. And a lot of what we talk about, I think, as homeschool moms online is, well, I discussed it with my kids and we talk about everything. And yeah, I was on board with that for a while, but then I was like, why am I having to talk to my kids every day about, well, people used to think that this about Black people, but now they don't. And now we're reading another book the next day. Well, I know they said this about Black people, but it's not like that anymore. You know what I mean? It was just getting to the point where I said, something's not right. I have to stop. I can't just keep saying, here, read this great thing, but then backpedaling as to why this isn't true or this isn't so great. And so I think that's one of the things that comes up in classics. And then the other thing is just a complete ignoring. So especially, you're looking at this time, you're thinking, okay, during this time where this story took place or what was happening, there would have been a lot of other people. I might be thinking a lot of other Black people. It could be something else. Or there were a lot of Indigenous people all around. How
Right.
could you have a whole book and never mention it? Just wiped off the face of the earth. And so I think those two are the most problematic issues that I've seen.
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, we definitely, when we're reading, we run across these things too. And I am curious to talk about how we both handle them and what that looks like as far as if you don't know it's coming and you run into that. I mean, we stop, and there are books where I've been like, this is a lot that I'm having to stop. And maybe if I'm, just reading it out loud, I'll just stop, and go, hey, did y'all catch that? Let's talk about that really quickly.
Sure.
Or there are other times where if I'm reading loud, I just might skip over it, if it comes up again, if we've already discussed it. But that can be a really frustrating thing to have to do over and over again. What does that look like in your house when you actually run into those things in books?
Well, honestly, it was a lot easier when my kids were younger because I was reading all of these books aloud and I would skip over it. And so, really, I was feeling something inside, consternation inside me, but it wasn't being passed along to my children. But occasionally, even I'm really good at catching things when I'm reading aloud, but sometimes I just didn't see it coming. So I have said things where I was like, I wish that I had not said that. But then now my kids are older and, they need to read their own books sometimes. And so I think that's where the call of the wild from the top of the mountain, that's where I kind of have started being like, whoa, guys, let's talk about this. I want to have this dialogue among moms because I would like for a flag to be raised if you're recommending a book. So if a mom says to me, oh, I think this is such a great book, but on page 124, they rip Black people, I think I would like you to tell me that before I hand that to my daughter or my son. And so I try to do the same, but I also recognize that requires us to be aware, because there are some books, and I hate to admit this, but I'm just being honest, where someone from another culture has told me that the book was problematic. And I'm thinking, I read that book. I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tell it to me, I'm like, ooh, yeah. And I realized that because it wasn't my culture, it didn't ring a bell as loudly in my mind as it would have if that had been Black people they were talking about. And I hate that, but I feel like I have to train myself to recognize and hear things that my ears may otherwise just let go.
And I think that's where having conversations and can help bring awareness and just talk about why, being able to listen and say, oh, tell me why, that was problematic in that book, and just being open to hearing what people are saying. That way we're going into it also with our eyes open and know what might be something we don't want to pass on to our kids without even realizing it too, especially.
I think that goes to sometimes also, like you said, talking and having conversations and becoming more educated myself, because there are some things that I've found now are negative stereotypes that I thought were true. And so I didn't know that was a negative stereotype. And there's no way I would have known that without someone telling me or me reading about it or whatever. So I think I can't just sit here and just expect that whatever I know from my own education, I'll be able to detect these problematic issues, but I have to actually go and seek that information if I care enough, right, to do so.
Right. Because I don't want to be perpetuating something that I'm not even realizing I'm doing.
That's right.
So yeah, conversations are good. Exactly
Yeah.
what we're doing. So when we had talked before about your kids are younger, my kids are getting a little bit older, and it's been easier about, just reading aloud to them. So what are you going to do? What's your plan as they get older? And if you don't know what's in a book, are you still going to hand them to them when they get older? Are you planning to pre-read? What's that process going to look for you?
So when I first started giving books to my children independently, I was pre-reading. I was pre-reading 100%, and I was really proud of it too. I was like, oh, I would never give books to my child without reading it first. And then those little readers have started to pile up on me. And also, like, I have other things that I want to do that I think are also part of me. And so I was
Yeah.
reading every night. And I have a husband that I love and I would like to talk to, and
Mhm.
all these things. And I was barely keeping up. And so that was also leaving no time for my personal reading as well. And so I was like, okay, this is not sustainable. So
Mhm.
for me, what I do is I pre-read everything that's nonfiction, because I have a particular sensitivity to racism being presented in those books as fact.
Mhm.
So every page of every nonfiction book I pre-read. For fiction, I have a little more latitude, because I feel that in some cases you can tell that this is the author's opinion and they're sharing it as letting us know what they think about a group of people. But in a lot of cases, it's more this character has this feeling or thinks this, and it's appropriate for the time period, and I'm more willing to let some of those things go. So
Mhm.
I rely a lot on reviews. I also am really good at doing a heavy skim. So I'm
Mhm.
looking, I'm like, okay, and I'll read those pages more carefully, and I'll just kind of flip through the pages. But I feel that being in community with other moms is my biggest weapon.
Mhm.
So I can't read all the things, you can't read all the things, but
Mhm.
we can definitely, and I mean, I'm quick to grab my phone and text like, girl, page 184, watch out. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I think that, we're it's a village, right? We're all trying to do right by our kids. And then quite honestly, some things just get by. But I feel like those are the things I love it when my kids come and tell me, Mommy, look
Mhm.
what it says here. Like that's crazy that they said that about, and I'm like, isn't it though? And I love that,
Yeah.
because I realize that our training has done well. And that's all I really want. It's not to keep them from seeing anything bad ever. It's for them to recognize what
Yes.
they see as whether it's truth or not. And so as long as they're recognizing it consistently, I can let that I don't want to say leash, rope. I don't know. I can
I
let
gotcha.
them. I can give them a little more and more freedom that doesn't make them sound like an animal.
No, yeah, I'm right there with you. I get that. Like, I want to have set a precedent in having conversations to where they understand when they reach things that it makes them think about it and go, oh, I'm not sure. Let me go talk with mom about that. That we'll have set that precedent of conversation and discussion, and having, read aloud some where we did stop and discuss, or I pointed things out, is so important, I think. But like you've said, it can get a little burdensome if it's every book.
Yeah,
And I will say,
balance. Yeah,
what'd you say?
I said balance. We
A
need
balance.
balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I definitely do also, really with any book, older books, newer books, I will go to reviews, and I will sort by the lowest and I'll
Yes.
sort by the highest, because, people on the lowest reviews are either going to be like, I hated it because it has this in it. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm okay with addressing that, or a certain topic. And then others will say, I didn't like it because it had this. And I think, oh, okay, that's something we're going to either have to address, or maybe that one's just not for us right now, or it's not the right time, to introduce it with my kids or
And I
something.
think that's a really good point, that this is different for every family.
Hmm.
Okay, so like for example, my bias is really towards hurtful racial things,
Hmm.
because it was hurting. It was hurting my child, so I want to stop. I don't want her to feel hurt,
Yeah.
and I don't want her to take those things personally. And so that's one of the things I'm vigilant about. But for instance, I my children aren't particularly sensitive. So there are certain books that we've read where I've seen a lot of moms and reviews like, "Oh my gosh, that was so violent," or "that was so,
Yeah.
this." My kids are like, "Bring it on, the battle war," and I was like, oh, "Okay." They loved that.
Yeah.
And so that sense of adventure and mystery and, oh my gosh, all the drama, like they really enjoy that. So for another family, they may be on the lookout for that. And I
Right.
think that what I appreciate most isn't someone telling me whether I should read a book or shouldn't read a book to my kids, but more of them saying, hey, heads up, this is what's on there. And I noticed like, it's one of the things I like about Reshelving Alexandria. I have a membership to that website and they give these little heads up. And it doesn't say you shouldn't read it or you should. They're just like, hey, look, we just want to let you know that, I don't know, magic is used or whatever it may be.
Right.
And I'd be like, okay, I'm good with that. Or I see something and I'm like, thank you. We won't read that. Or I'll make sure I read this aloud, or I'll only give it to my older child and not the younger one, even though it's a picture book, things
Right.
like that. So I love the heads up without the judgment because it's different for all of us.
Yeah, I think, just going into it with, the wisdom of what's right for your family, because learning through literature, we get questions of, is this good for an 8-year-old? And I just don't know every person's 8-year-old in their home. And some of them it might be, and some of them it might not be. And people, children are sensitive, like you said, to different things. And so just knowing what, at least in general, knowing what you're opening up to is important. And sometimes that is in conversation with other people. Sometimes that's from reviews. Sometimes hopefully that is from, the websites that recommend them will talk about it. And that, that's something that I definitely want to take into account moving forward for sure.
Yeah, and I do sometimes, I'm sorry to interrupt, I think
No.
that there has to be a certain amount of, I know for me, I realize some things are going to fall through the cracks. My kids are going to read things that in a perfect world I wish that they hadn't read. But that same thing happens with television and movies, like that I've reviewed and everything, and we're sitting down watching it, and I was like, I wish that they hadn't said that, but they did, and it happened. And it happens in real life too when we're with other people. So we don't just live alone in our house with no books and no television and no movies and no friends. When they go to the pool this summer, they've heard things, that I wish they hadn't heard. And so I think that for me, I'm recognizing that my power is so finite, and I'm really expecting God to fill that gap for me, where I can't be all the time.
Yeah, because I don't think that we should want to insulate our kids from ever coming across anything, either one extreme or the other, of saying like, I don't ever want them to read classics and not, encounter those things, or that I never want them to read modern books because, it might have things that I don't want to introduce or whatever. That we don't want to insulate them. We just want to prepare them. And that's what we're doing when we read classics, modern ones, anything in between, is preparing them on how to handle the things that they come across, and how, helping them think about these things and not just receive it.
Yeah,
And
that's really good. Not just receive it. I love that. That's it. That summarizes how I feel about it. That they are able to, to think and recognize truth and not just receive what they read.
Yeah. And I think that having a variety can really expand a kid's ability to do that, to have not just only wrestling with classics or only wrestling with modern, or, but to really have a feast, as Charlotte Mason would say, right? We have a wide feast for them to think about, and in all kinds of different stories. So, I mean, the idea of classics, there's some value. Maybe they're not nostalgic to everyone, but there's still a value to them for everyone. So then how can we choose books? You were talking about, like, you might talk to friends. Is that a main source of what you go to, or where are you looking the majority for books?
I usually start with the books that are recommended by different homeschool curriculum companies or blogs. And also, I already mentioned Reshelving Alexandria. I depend on that a lot. I use the Facebook group Living Books for Living All People.
Yeah, something like that. I'm on that one too.
And so I just kind of sit back and listen to book recommendations there. So I guess I'm saying I pull from a lot of different sources. I have a friend who has Charlotte Mason CityLiving.com, and she has a running multicultural book list on there. So just different sources. There's not just one. I'm constantly looking, and I'm looking on these books these book lists for two things. I'm looking for classics that I want to read, and I'm looking for the books that I feel we can add to our what we're doing for the year in order to balance whatever I feel is lacking in the classics. I feel like both sides balance each other. And so I might say, you know, for one example, I really wanted my kids to read Pollyanna. Why? Simply because I love Pollyanna. And that's pretty much it. No deep reason. I just think it's a great book. And so, but after we watched Pollyanna, we did Pages and Popcorn, which is what my family does when we read a book with the plan to watch the movie. Yeah. So Pollyanna was a Pages and Popcorn book. And so after we finished the book, we had family movie night and we watched Polly, which is a remake of that book in film, you know, made for television film. But Pollyanna is Keisha Knight Pulliam, who played Rudy on The Cosby Show, and Aunt Polly is Felicia Rashad, who played Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show, and it's like pretty much an all-black cast. And there's music and everything, and it was just a delight. I mean, I just kept looking over at my kids while they were watching it, and they were smiling and laughing and getting up and dancing. And so for them, Pollyanna is a book that they relate to, not because they could see themselves in that book, but because I showed them that Pollyanna is really about a way of being, and she could be anyone. Right. And so I think that that's just an example of how I can take a classic and I can make it relevant to my kids without doing anything different from the book. I don't have a Black Pollyanna book to give them, but I found another way to show them that Pollyanna transcends race.
Yes, and that goes back to those kind of themes in classics that can be applied to any generation, any time period. It's just, you know, human themes that we can glean from. And I grew up watching Polly, and I loved that movie. That was Pollyanna to me. I loved that movie so much. It was like recorded from TV, I think, on a VHS.
Yeah, it was. I had it on VHS.
It was a great movie, actually. I want to watch that again now. So let's talk about a little bit about that balance you're talking about, bringing in these other books, because you refer to them a lot as life-giving books that you add in. And like, are there different types of books? Like, we had talked a little bit before about how in our home we add in a lot of picture book biographies, because more modern ones can bring in a lot of diversity, because now those stories are being told and they're really short, so we can do a lot of them at a time.
Yeah.
What does that look like in your home as far as those life-giving ones?
Well, that's one of my strategies, right? So we still use picture books a lot, even though my oldest is about to be 11. So she has no thought whatsoever that we're going to stop using picture books anytime soon. So we all love them.
Never did.
And I think that I'm usually looking for a few different types of books to add in with our classics. So one, I'm looking for books about that same historical time period that book took place, that has a more diverse group of characters, or focuses on a diverse family or something like that. And in those cases, most of the time though, when you read about those books, as with Black families, they're going to be talking about the struggle, and they're going to be talking about how hard life has been and all experiences they've gone through. And those books are really important in my home. I love them, and we have a lot of them. But I also am sometimes looking for that spirit of kids just being kids, just a family loving each other and going through life. It's harder to find. It's a little bit more of a unicorn, because typically if you're talking about a Black family in America, that they have had a lot of struggles related to race and things like that. But every now and then I can find some that are really, the story, that line that they've tried to focus on is more about maybe something that's going on with their friends or in school or their animals and things like that. And I like to make sure that I'm including those books about kids just being kids, so that it doesn't always seem like everything, you know, you're Pollyanna and Heidi and they're white and they're having a great time and they're, you know, picking flowers and petting goats, and then you're Black and you're like, move off the sidewalk when a white person's coming. You're so poor, your family's, you know, sharecropping and they're never going to get ahead, you know, and it's like, gosh, you know, this doesn't seem good at all. And so I like to balance that. So those are the types of books that I'm usually looking for. And in picture books, they've been very easy to find. And our home library is just phenomenal. Mirrors and windows when it comes to picture books. But when you get to chapter books, it's been a lot harder. So especially you still want that literary quality.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to just fall off you got what you were looking for from diversity, but then it's junk. So you're looking for that literary quality. You're looking for books that are appropriate and don't get into inappropriate things for your child's age. Like, I think the young adult world, when my kids are reading young adult books and they're at that age, oh, that's going to be phenomenal, because that's another area where it picks back up. But right around upper elementary, middle school is a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't have a lot of great answers. I'm always looking. I have a few different books that I've used, but I think that's also where I tend to let in things that aren't considered living books. And so that's what you referred to when I talk about life-giving books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're life-giving for my family because they have representation in them for my kids to have those mirrors, but they may not rise to the literary quality of what we consider to be a classic.
Yeah.
And yet they're also not twaddle,
Mm-hmm.
as Miss Mason would call it. They're not just down there in the gutter, but they're in between. They're neither. And they're an important part of, we have shelves of life-giving books that have kind of feed my children's soul.
And if they add value to your home, then that's value for you. And I would seek those out too, just so that my kids can have the experience of seeing that diversity just in literature in general. And so I think that if it adds value, and like you were saying, balance to it, you we're not trying to exclude one or the other on a type of book, but just what adds value to your home and to your family's experience. And I think that's important to consider when you're doing that. We do, sometimes I feel like it's not exactly the same thing, but you were talking about adding in different cultures, like through folk tales. That can be really fun. Just exploring lots of different cultures that way. And then sometimes you see similarities between them, which is really fascinating, or you see what's unique about them to a particular culture. And I find it really easy to appreciate through, different cultures, through all their different folk tales or fairy tales and fables and things, and unique personalities that come out. And then we try to add in poetry, which is obviously not the same thing as reading The Wind in the Willows, but it's, you can have classic poetry that maybe wasn't popular and maybe even published by people of color a while back, but now we're able to rediscover that now and to study those poets and, talk about the beauty of their writing. And that's maybe another way to bring another experience in.
Oh, those are all excellent ways. I think that, and music,
Music. Yeah.
composers, and sometimes I don't have enough information to study a whole composer study for that term, but just listening to the music of other composers and the art.
Mm-hmm.
And picture study has been a huge one for us. And just yesterday I posted on my blog about Shakespeare and how in my house, even Shakespeare can be a mirror. So depending on how you teach it. So sometimes it's that you're not changing anything in the material itself, but the way you present the material.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think all of those. And it's important because that being able to provide mirrors in those other places allows me more room to be able to include the classics, because I am still balanced there.
Right.
And I think without those other things, it would be more of a struggle.
Definitely. And looking at the art and looking at composers and things, you are seeing their perspective. You're seeing, their experience that they had and seeing something through their eyes, which is another facet, I guess, of what we're doing with our kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you talk about adding in those books, now I know that you have your heritage packs that you offer on heritagemom.com. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that helps others to do that in their homes?
Yeah, so basically my thought is that we all have our different curriculum options that we prefer, different companies, whether we put it together ourselves or we pull from a book list or we buy lesson plans. And I found that most all of them, I'm not gonna say all because I'm sure there's something somewhere that I haven't seen, but most of them lack diversity. But they have other really good things that we are wanting, right? Myself included. And so I created these heritage packs so that people could confidently use the curriculum and maybe the book lists and things that have all these goodies that they want, but they can add this on with it
Mhm.
to help create something that together provides a more complete view of whether it's American history or a complete view of people of color. So it's like an enrichment add-on to whatever it is you're using.
Well, I bought one and I'm excited to
Yay, thank
use
you.
that one. And learning through literature, we have book guides that we go through. The majority of them are classics, but it's a way to look through that window when you don't understand it and to kind of peel back the layers of what's really happening here, what's the setting, what's the, where are they in the world, and to, look through that and understand it better and
Yeah,
to engage with it better. And so, like you're saying, it's balance, right? Like you want to be able to look through the window, you want to be able to understand what you're seeing and really think about it, and then you want to have that other life-giving elements also included in. So it's a beautiful thing, I think, when we have that balance, not exclusion, right?
yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm really looking for, wanting moms to have freedom, and feeling like they can put together what's best for their families and just trying to help provide, tools. And that's the same thing I know you're doing. So I think it's not really prescriptive, but it's supportive.
Right.
And I just love that.
Yes, definitely. Well, this has been great. I love talking with people about books, and I really hope that those watching are just able to, it's able to help them navigate this in their own homes and make some decisions on, how they can add these sorts of books and read classics and feel confident about it, and also add in life-giving books to their home and whatever that looks like for their family. So
I think
thank
that's
you for being here. Don't forget, if you want to check out more from Amber, go to heritagemom.com for her heritage packs, for more insights, all kinds of wonderful blog posts there and information. And check out learningthroughliterature.com for some literature-based learning resources and book guides. So thank you, Amber, for joining
You're
me.
welcome. It was great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.